It's a tale as old as time. It takes place when human beings were still very new on the planet, after the flood that almost destroyed that planet, when everyone literally spoke the same language. And someone, or maybe many, thought that it would be a really good idea to build a tower so tall that it would reach the heavens and perhaps even the Holy One. Quote, the center of the universe, the arena of divine activity, where humankind and the gods might enter into direct contact with one another, unquote. A monument to themselves, their ingenuity, greatness. And as some climbed upward, they ignored the suffering of those who had more difficulty keeping up. Midrash claims people paid no mind if a worker on the tower fell to his death. If a brick fell, however, they lamented the delay in their building project, unquote. Those whose sole objective was to reach the top lost their humanity in the process. Those who struggled on the bottom lost their lives. God didn't like the direction this tower and these people were headed, so God decided it was time to do some investigating. Genesis 11:5 reads, the Lord came down to look at the city and tower that man had built, and the Lord said, if as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us then go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech. That is why the city was called Babel, or Bavel, because there the Lord confounded the speech of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth, unquote. You may be wondering why I'm talking about this Torah portion today. We don't read it, but just wait for it. There's a connection. Unable to communicate with each other, forced to migrate throughout the world, God might have thought, mission accomplished. Without such strength in numbers, they would no longer have the ability to be partners in crime and continue on such a destructive and dangerous path. Perhaps God underestimated the resilience of God's creations, because wherever they traveled, they still found ways to wreak harm on each other and compromise their relationship with God. You just think Sodom and Gomorrah, multiple uprisings, another failed building project, the Golden Calf, and dangerous sibling rivalry, just to name a few things. After each grievous offense, there would be a reckoning. Often plague swept through their ranks, taking out those who were the biggest offenders and scaring the people into submission for a while before the whole cycle began again, leaving prophets whose words fell on deaf ears to contemplate another line of work. And here we are, thousands of years later, in a scarily similar situation. Might not be exactly like the Tower of Babel story, but it contains some similar connections. We too are separated from each other and facing a devastating plague of our own. It's not a huge leap to surmise that after years of destroying the environment, precious natural resources, and much of the animal kingdom, and creating a world in which hunger, genocide, injustice, inequity, prejudice, and hatred have been tightly woven into the fabric of society, God decides that enough is enough. God can't scatter us anymore because, well, frankly, that's been done. So God decides to just shut down the world and institute the biggest global timeout the planet has ever experienced. Maybe this time, God figured, they just need some time away from each other. Time to do a little serious self-introspection, to think about how they've been speaking to and treating each other. Not to mention the fact that the environment could sure use a break from the havoc they've wreaked on it. So, is COVID-19 God's wake-up call to us? God's way of saying, get your act together, people, and until you do, you can go to your room and contemplate your bad behavior. Our ancestors might very well have seen it that way, as the Torah is replete with explanations and justifications claiming that plagues, disease, and natural disasters were punishment for disobeying God. You just look at what happened to Miriam. She dissed her brother and ended up with leprosy, separated from the community until she got the all clear from the priests. Unfortunately, there are some religious leaders, a small minority, I hope, who also see it that way. An article in the Jerusalem Post notes that Chief Rabbi Sfat, Shmuel Eliah, claims, quote, the world was coming closer to the days of the Messiah, and implied that the coronavirus outbreak was bringing about greater adherence to God's word, unquote. Rabbi Shlomo Aviner claims that COVID has served to put people in their place and remind them who is really in charge. Quote, if this is the case, that mankind is proud, mankind knows everything, understands everything, let us see you fight the smallest of God's creations. This creation is called a corona, a crown. We must restore the crown to God, unquote. Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Meir Mazuz claims that the LGBTQ community and gay pride marches were against nature and has caused the coronavirus pandemic. Boy, Rabbi Mazuz, that argument is so 2005. Obviously, Rabbi Mazuz never read Pastor John Hagee's response to the cause of Hurricane Katrina. Quote, I believe that New Orleans had a level of sin that was offensive to God, and they were recipients of the judgment of God for that. That sin being that the city was planning a homosexual rally, which ended up not happening because Katrina struck that same day. He later backtracked, probably under advisement. Did COVID-19 constitute a plague? According to Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of the word, most definitely. An epidemic disease causing a high rate of mortality. But has God had a hand in this plague? Well, the God I believe in certainly hasn't. Blame it on bats. Those creepy winged nocturnal mammals are most likely the carriers. Or more likely, the pangolin, another anteater type mammal draped head to toe in sharp scales, could also be the culprit. Victims of animal trafficking. Pangolins are illegally sold in live animal markets throughout Southeast Asia and China. Nature.com stated researchers said they found a coronavirus in smuggled pangolins that was a 99% genetic match to the virus circulating in people, unquote. Now, we shouldn't be trying to pin this on innocent animals, however. Researcher Sarah Plato speculates the problem is not the animals, it's that we get in contact with them. In other words, the illegal capture and selling of animals may just have resulted in this pandemic. And that's not on God, that's on humans. In his recent article entitled, Is Coronavirus a Biblical Plague? Rabbi Arthur Wasco states, the coronavirus is perfectly normal until it leaves a species. It only becomes destructive and deadly because we don't leave space between ourselves and various other species, unquote. In other words, people are not allowing other species to grow and flourish in their own habitats and spaces. We come in, disrupt it, and then disrupt the whole ecological system. We have created conditions that have led to droughts, famines, floods, fires, hurricanes, unbreathable air, undrinkable water, and unrecyclable waste. And we haven't listened to our modern day prophetic voices, i.e. scientists, that have seen this coming for decades. Back in Leviticus, Parshat Bechukotai, we are bombarded with a series of curses that will be leveled against the Israelites if they don't follow the commandments. 26:19 states, I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper, so that your strength shall be spent to no purpose. Your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit, unquote. We are reminded that if we ignore the statutes regarding how we care for our world, if we abuse the land, ignore the threat of global warming, the imminent extinction of certain species, and continue to pollute the world with toxins, we will pay the consequences, but will be hard-pressed to blame God for it. COVID-19 has caused immeasurable suffering and disruption to our way of life, economy, relationships, as well as our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. It has been devastating in the toll it's taken on human life in so many ways. And we, in our world, might never really be the same again. We still have yet to discover what our new normal, you can even call it that, will be like. We have yet to assess the damage because we still don't know how and when it will end. But as horrific as the past 6 months have been, there have been some interesting and unexpected silver linings. Our forced retreat from society might be crummy for us, but it's been pretty good for the environment. For one thing, noise pollution has dropped substantially. In an article written by Marina Corin for The Atlantic, she reveals a startling discovery from a seismologist. Quote, normally we wouldn't pick up a 5.5 magnitude earthquake from the other side of the world because it would be too noisy. But with less noise, our instrument is now able to pick up 5.5s with much nicer signals during the day, unquote. Rebecca Franks, an American living in Wuhan, China, commented, I used to think there weren't really birds in Wuhan because you rarely saw them and you never heard them. All day long now I hear birds singing. It stops me in my tracks to hear the sound of their wings. There's also been an improvement in air quality, well, at least until those catastrophic California fires began, another byproduct of global warming. But one scientist warns there's a quantifiable temporary benefit, but as we go about our recovery, I think we'll go back to business as usual. We're not solving climate change by having a global pandemic, unquote. Michelle Fournet, a marine ecologist who has also studied the decline of global ocean noise during the pandemic, astutely comments, nature is taking a breath when the rest of us are holding ours, unquote. Another silver lining, although we've been physically separated, we can at least be together through the miracle of the internet. From all the harm I think social media can do, being able to see family and friends and engage in learning and prayer through offerings across the country and the world has been a blessing. I think that we've all come to realize how important it is to reach out, not only to others whom we are close to, but to those whom we may not have checked in on months, even years. Being able to reconnect and renew past relationships can be a gift. For me, I've appreciated the wonderful opportunities that online communication has afforded. I've been able to study at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, hear amazing speakers, zoom into B'nai Mitzvah, Shabbat, and festival services, and attend weddings and funerals in places I probably would not have been able to travel to otherwise. And seemingly little things aren't so little now. I have a renewed appreciation for the ability to simply take a deep breath. And it doesn't bother me when my kids are too busy to talk when I call. Just getting a text letting me know that they feel fine makes my day. And if I'm lucky enough to snag a container of disinfecting wipes from Kroger's, it's like I've won the lottery. Who knew I could be brought to tears after receiving my Walmart delivery of isopropyl alcohol bottles? It's been deeply moving to witness so many healthcare heroes risking their lives on a daily basis to try to keep the rest of us safe. Thank you, Davina Sassoon. It's been heartwarming to hear stories about neighbors checking in on each other and making sure that those who aren't mobile have groceries. I recently saw a report on TV about an original Rosie the Riveter. You know, one of the women who joined the workforce during World War II. You've seen the picture. A Rosie model is flexing her muscle, her hair adorned with a stylish red and white polka dotted bandana. May Cryer, now 94 years old, has made 300 red and white polka dotted face masks for those who need them. People from all over the country have been sending her elastic, thread, and other materials so she can keep up with the ever-increasing demand. She's up to 1,000 requests, and she was one of those Rosie the Riveters. At first, it seemed like this crisis might just help reunite us as a country. After all, we were facing the same enemy, and we're constantly reminded we're all in this together. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. Instead of coming together, our country continues to be increasingly polarized when it comes to how to deal with this disease, among other things. And it's been a disaster with tragic consequences. We're basically worse off now than when we started this whole thing. It's now the second worst pandemic in US history, behind the Spanish flu, which killed approximately 675,000 according to the CDC. Right now, as of last week anyway, when I updated this, worldwide there were 27,722,275 confirmed cases and 900,878 deaths worldwide. In the US, there are 6,514,223 cases and almost 200,000 deaths. And when wearing face masks becomes a political issue, what hope do we have of ever seeing things turn around? In recalling how people came together to help each other survive the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and World War II, Mrs. Cryer wondered, I don't understand why people can't band together now. Working in the Boeing factory helping make warplanes was hard. Wearing a mask seems simple to me after going through all that. What do you think? We've seen the best in people, and we've seen acts of sheer inhumanity and brutality. And we've had plenty of time to learn about the injustices that we've perhaps ignored or refused to see before, when we're going on about the business of living our own lives on the outside. We can be proud of how we've met the challenges of sheltered life with grit, creativity, and even a sense of humor. And when this pandemic is fully under control, God willing, we will need to ask ourselves this question. Will we continue to care deeply enough for the people we've reached out to stay in contact with them? Will we be more mindful of how we use our natural resources? Will we be more sensitive to the needs of marginalized communities and fight for the rights of those who still aren't considered equal in this country? COVID-19 has been a curse that will have lasting repercussions for generations to come, yet we can still find blessing within it. The blessing of cherishing the precious lives we've been given for as long as we have them. The blessing of realizing that we are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And the blessing of knowing that when we feel safe enough, all of us, to venture out into it again, we now recognize what we must do to help make our world a safe place for all humanity. Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom. We now will turn to a shared screen for an attachment that Brent Sassley will lead us in, called God of the Faithful.
Shabbat Shalom. God of the Faithless, God of the Faithful by Edward Feld. God of the faithless and God of the faithful. With doubt, we come in loneliness. We wait silently. We pray, expecting nothing, wanting everything. God of the faithful and God of the faithless. You who speak in whispered silence. You whose reason is mystery. Your order is infinite. Remember, we are finite and need words and reason. God of the faithless and God of the faithful. God in all forms and formless. Who was and is and will be, hear us and turn.
Thank you. Everyone okay? Everyone doing well? Zoom is working for everyone? Good. You can hear me? Great. So our whole service has been leading to this moment, the recitation of the Musaf, or additional service, which is basically an additional Amidah with some very significant additions. If there's anything you remember about going to services growing up, I'll bet it's some of the prayers and melodies that you're about to hear. From Hineni, the Chazan's prayer expressing publicly, wondering if the cantor is even worthy of praying on behalf of the entire congregation, to the Unitana Tokef, probably the most problematic prayer in the Maksor, in which we recite a list of possible fates that await us in the new year. It hits especially close to home this year. Who could have imagined a year ago that almost 200,000 Americans would die from a disease that no one had even heard of before last January? I bet we could all add a few more lines to the Unitana Tokef this year. A rabbi friend of mine recently sent me this stunning, raw reinterpretation of the Unitana Tokef written by Imani Romney Rosa Chapman, a Black Jewish writer and organizer and educator. I want to share just a few lines with you. It's entitled Unitana Tokef for Black Lives. It's raw, it's visceral, shocking, and incredibly impactful. In the morning it is written, and by curfew it is sealed. Who shall die while jogging? From Maud Arbery. Who shall die for a traffic violation? Sandra Bland. Who shall die while reading a book in their own car? Keith Scott. Who shall die while begging for their life, their breath? Eric Garner and George Floyd. It goes on and on. And it ends, but repentance, prayer, and charity avert judgment's severe decree, And there's a question mark there, not a period. When will you atone? How will you atone? This year, I see the Unitad Tokef differently too. We cannot control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we behave, how we act, and how we speak. We can decide what mark we want to leave on this world and whose lives might be changed because we chose to help them. Thinking about what we can do can seem daunting and overwhelming, but Maimonides reminds us if a person does one mitzvah, behold, he has tipped himself and the entire world to the side of innocence and brought about salvation for himself and for everyone else. Mishneh Torah, we'll go to Shiva 3:4. We need to keep reminding ourselves of this. Shuli Reuben Schwartz, the new chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, adds, let's take to heart the words of Rambam and read mitzvah expansively. If each of us undertakes even one action in this moment, we think about wearing a mask, feeding the hungry, voting, and taking even small steps to promote justice and equality in our communities, but it could be almost anything. We could tip the scales and make a real difference for the entire world. Our actions are necessary, though surely not sufficient to make the world more whole, but they can light the way.